immigration into the United States has been going on for more than 100 years. Their reasons for coming have been for political, economic, and for conflicts in their own country. Even though there has been constant Mexican immigration into the United States, there have been two major waves in history. The first started in 1910 during the Mexican Revolution. The Mexicans have been discriminated and treated harshly. They have been exploited for over a century. They are a source of cheap labor, and many Americans have taken advantage of it. The second major wave has been going on for about the last 20 years, and it's still going on today.
The influx of Mexican immigrants started in the late 19th century. This was due to both political and economical instability within Mexico. In 1819, the Mexican population in the United States was about 75,000. By 1900, the population had risen to 562,000. This group of immigrants was mostly composed of poor and illiterate people. Many assumed the jobs of unskilled laborers. They worked in the mines, on farms, and on railroads. When the Chinese Exclusion Act was instated, it opened up many jobs. The Mexican immigrants took the jobs that the Chinese formerly had. Many of these job openings were in the railroad industry. More than half the laborers in the railroad industry consisted of Mexicans. About 70% of the track layers and 90% of the maintenance crew consisted of Mexican workers. They were also a big part of the mining industry in Colorado, Arizona, and California. Many of the immigrants lived in the southwestern part of the United States. As the railroads grew farther and farther north, the immigrants followed. 1910 was a major year in Mexico. The Mexican Revolution had begun. This revolution was to change both the social and economic structures of Mexico. This revolution also resulted in an influx of Mexican immigrants into the United States. With all the fighting and conflict in Mexico, many people immigrated to avoid it all. There was so much danger and economic catastrophe from the war that many Mexicans fled north. Even some federal officials and revolutionaries fled so that they could finish plotting invasions into Mexico. Many of these immigrants sought jobs in construction and maintenance on the railroads. Most of the immigrants in the early parts of the revolution were the poor and sick. The revolution was at its strongest by 1914, and even the upper class of Mexico started to immigrate then. When the Immigration Act of 1917 was initiated, everything changed. The act stated that immigrants had to pass a test to show that they could read and write before they came into the United States. The act was initially supposed to prevent Eastern Europeans from coming into the country, but it stopped many Mexicans as well, since many were illiterate and had very little education. They also had to pay an $8 tax, which was too much for many Mexican immigrants to afford. In June of 1917, Congress had made some modifications to the act to allow Mexican immigrants into the United States. This meant that farm workers were allowed to enter the country to work even if they didn't meet the literacy and tax requirement stated in the Immigration Act. Legal immigration, though, decreased by a lot in 1917 because of this. It had also started a new influx of illegal immigration into the United States. The next major Mexican immigration wave began in the late 1970s and early 1980s. This wave consisted of illegal migration into the United States. The INS had tried to prevent it but had failed. The immigrants had crossed the Mexican border. Then, in 1986, Congress passed another immigration bill. It was called the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, also known as the IRCA. Anyone who employed illegal immigrants would be fined. At the same time, it allowed other immigrants who had been in the United States since 1982 to apply to legalize their status. There was an economic crisis in Mexico in 1994. This has increased immigration into the United States since about 1 million Mexicans had lost their jobs in Mexico. Because of all the immigration from Mexico into the United States, the U.S. brought out Operation Gatekeeper. It was a border patrol system. It was only between the Mexican and South California border. More immigrants started to move further inland to cross the border, for example, the Texas and Mexican border. Then Operation Rio Grande was put into action in 1997. This was another border patrol, but it was along the Texas Mexican border instead.
Mexican is the largest Hispanic group in the United States and is also the fastest growing ethnic group in the country. Although it is not the largest ethnic group in the country, it is though the largest ethnic group of legal immigration. In the year 2000, the Mexican American population was estimated 20.6 million. In 2003, an estimated 7 million unauthorized Mexicans were said to be living in the United States. 70% of all illegal immigrants are Mexicans. Most of the Mexican immigrants are situated in California, Texas, Illinois, Arizona, and New Mexico. The most populated cities of Mexican immigrants include Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, San Antonio, and Phoenix.